Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. There's many times on Body Bags where we talk about what are referred to as weapons of convenience. Let's think about this just for a second. If you were, I don't know, and hopefully you won't be, attacked in your home, is there anything within arm's reach that you could grab hold of and defend yourself? Now, what I mean by that, harkens back to Clue, right? A lead pipe, a candle holder, whatever it might be, and I don't know, maybe my brain is so twisted because of what I've done for a living for so many years. I think about objects that can generate enough damage when wielded appropriately to fend someone off. But today, we're going to have a discussion about a case involving a very interesting weapon that was used to facilitate the death of another. And this case has drug on for a long, long time. But back to our point here. What was this weapon, you say? This weapon, to our great surprise, is a tent stake. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, when the kids were little, it wasn't me, and she will say,
Wow.
It wasn't me. Kimmy always took the lead on camping trips.
Uh-huh.
And I don't like camping. It is just not my thing. We've got these great stories now in hindsight, with the kids, like being in the middle of the rain and trying to fry chicken, over an open fire. Just these crazy stories where rain is pouring down on us in the mountains. And at the time, you're absolutely miserable, as I knew it would be. And we never quite had enough money to afford an actual camper. We were availed the use of a pop-up camper for a while, and that was high living for us. But primarily, it would be me going to Walmart and purchasing the most extravagant I ever got was like a 3-room tent. It's got 3 separate rooms, and of course you're out there for a week, and it's just a mess. I mean, it's just an absolute mess. We did have great fun, but it's
you went camping for a week?
Yeah.
Wow, and that's like the 4th ring of hell.
We actually, here's a little inside baseball. We actually went camping at Disney World when I still would go to Disney World at Fort Wilderness, and came back with a surprise. Noah. I'll leave it at that, my son. And so, we spent a week down there, and we've gone camping up in East Tennessee. We've been all over the place camping. But, I spent a lot of time, and I had a whole variety of tools I would use. I spent a lot of time using tent stakes in order to get the thing set up right. And of course, you never can get the tension just right on it, and there's certain things, and you're afraid you're going to create some kind of gap in the tent, and it's going to rain in, which always inevitably happen. I'd put tarps over the tent to reinsure. It was so laborious, absolutely laborious.
And you have to make it all cheerful for the kids.
You have to
act like, and you have to be nice to your wife, even when she's saying, "Did you do this? Did you do that?" Yes! You can't do that. Yeah, baby. Thanks for that.
Mommy, where's Daddy going with that bottle of bourbon?
Yeah. I thought he was in AA. No, that was Uncle Dave.
Back in 3 hours.
The reason he's talking about tent stakes is that the title of this is the tent stake murder. And it's in Muncie, Indiana.
Yeah.
When I think of Muncie, Indiana, I think of Chuck Muncie, the running back.
Oh, yeah.
And I think of Gary, Indiana, where the Jackson 5 was from. And you put the two together, and you've got a really fast running back that can sing. But in this particular case, we have a guy named Mark Trent, 55 years old. He's got a house doing his thing. He allows a couple to move in with him. They're considerably younger than he is, in their late 30s, early 40s. Ian Sheldon and his wife. While they're living together, they have a disagreement, and the Sheldons leave, and all of a sudden, Mark Trent, well, his family can't find him. He kind of goes incommunicado. But before he disappears, well, I'm going to say this the right way. There was a post made on Facebook where Mark Trent says, I'm reevaluating my life and I'm going to make some changes and I might stop communicating with everybody. When that happens, if you had a friend or a family member that did that, what would your first thing be? If you didn't do anything to them, it would be getting on the phone, driving to their house saying, hey, man, what's going on?
Yeah, where are my car keys? That's what I would be doing. Yeah, absolutely. Knocking on the door. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when family did that, they went to his house, and I have a list of what they found, Joe. When family went to his house, they found his home abandoned. His dogs were left behind. His wallet still at the house. And his pickup truck was missing. Now, if you're a single guy in your mid-50s and you were going to leave, your truck, your dog, your wallet, those are things that are going with you.
Oh, you bet.
But we got dogs and wallet at the house and the truck's gone, Joe.
Yeah.
They report him missing. And it starts there, March 2016. What do you think?
It's, yeah, particularly when it comes to my dogs. I don't care if I got to walk, my dogs are going with me because I'm not going to leave my dogs behind. That is just, there's no mathematical equation out there where that factors in, as an element. For me, I'm going with my dogs, and the idea that someone would abandon their pups, at a house, and then, you add everything else into it. When you begin to think about the wallet and you begin to think about keys, the truck, and any changes that may have happened in the house.
After, the family, they did what you and I would do. They ran to check on them. They find all this stuff. Well,
yeah,
they do call the law, and the law starts looking into it. And oddly enough, they find that Mark Trent's debit card is still being used. While since the last time he was seen, February 29th or so. Yeah. Now, if you're gone and your credit debit cards are still being used, you're going to leave a bit of a breadcrumb trail,
yes,
right?
Yes, you are. Yep.
Police are going to find that. But every time they would look at the pictures at the ATMs, they couldn't figure out who was using it.
Yeah.
It was just enough they couldn't see. I can't imagine what that is like for an investigator to have hey, we got a camera on this one, and you pull it up and you got nothing, man. I can't imagine.
Well, let me tell you another thing that factors into this that I've encountered many times. And, working with a medical examiner, you always have those calls that come into the medical examiner. I want to know if my father's there. And it's for a myriad of reasons,
Wait a minute. You've actually had that call?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we used to keep a running logbook of it. You'd average a couple of those calls per week where families are looking for family members. And, we kind of had, there was this, it's not a joke, but it's this running theme that you get, and I've mentioned it before on the show where it's, it's like, I called everywhere. I even called the morgue looking for you, when the guy finally shows back up. But then there are those legitimate calls. And many times those calls would go like this. The caller would say, look, I've tried the police department, and this is the standard line. I've tried the police department. They're saying that my loved one, such as in this case, is a grown man. He can come and go as he pleases. We don't have any control over what a grown man is going to do. He's got his own house. He's got his own vehicle. We can't explain why he left his wallet behind. We can't explain why he left his dogs behind. But I don't want to enter into a discussion about free will here or anything.
Right.
But you're a grown man. You can make that decision. And so families get very frustrated with that. Well, the next stop along that continuum is they'll call the coroner, they'll call the medical examiner, and it seems it's rather morbid, but when you're looking for answers and you're a family member, you're going to try to exhaust everything that you can. You're going to you might get out in a car and cycle around to, if there's a restaurant that he goes to, a bar that he goes to, is there a grocery store? In smaller towns, a guy might go to the same grocery store or to the local, stop and rob, on the
Right.
corner. And, they
Wow.
might say, hey, has our cousin been in here to top off his truck with gas? No, we ain't seen him in a while. We haven't seen him. You're just looking for him. And of course, the morgue, they want to know, this is how he looks. This is how our loved one looks. And they give you a description, and you go through and this is kind of the inner workings of the medical examiner. You will have a descriptor for every unidentified body that you have in the morgue, the newest ones to the oldest ones.
Oh, wow.
And so you go down that list and you look and you see if there's any, because look, we're just as anxious to get people identified as people are to find their loved one. We want to try to find and clear if we can. And of course, many times it turns out, you get nothing. But the key to what I'm saying here is that many times when you're talking about adults, and we have friends out here in the audience right now that have experienced this. I guarantee you, brother, dollars to donuts, they have called the police department before, and they have asked, can you help us? Can you help us find our loved one? And they will get this comment thrown back at them. They're an adult. They can do whatever they want to do. This is not like a missing child. And so you're already behind the 8 ball at that point in time.
I have heard people make that joke, I even called the morgue.
Yeah.
But yeah. I wouldn't even know where to do that, and I'm in this business. So it's kind of funny when you look at it like that, but that is a frustration when you have a loved one, somebody you care about that's a part of your life and you can't find them. And, police are going to look at the situation and they're going to go to your place and they're going to look and they're going to go, okay, what stands out as something that doesn't fit? Sesame Street, one of these things doesn't belong here.
Right.
One of these things just doesn't belong. And the dogs are still there. The wallet is still there, but the truck is gone. Now, the one thing about this is the truck, while it was Mark Trent's truck, it was registered to his sister. So that did give police a little bit or investigators, an edge. They could look for it based on that.
Yeah.
But still, like you mentioned, you're a 55-year-old man. You have the right to do what you want to do.
Yes, you do.
But after the card search being used, after the time they had seen him, police started getting involved. But Joe, this is a missing persons case that remained a missing persons case.
Yeah.
Until a family member said, this isn't right.
Yeah.
It was a niece. It was a niece that actually got the ball rolling years later, but got the ball rolling.
Yeah. And fortunately for this family, they have answers. But unfortunately, it's not the answers they would have wanted. Dave, this case strikes me as one, we cover on Body Bags, we cover a lot of cases that are highly complex from a scientific perspective. But would you, in your opinion, would you classify this as a highly complex circumstantial case? Not necessarily scientifically, but it seems as though that, I don't know, at some point in time, wires got crossed or people kind of fell off the scent for some period of time. It strikes me that way.
It went away real quick. It went from, well, again, now you're back to what you said a minute ago, Joe. Look, I know he's your uncle. I know he's your brother, your friend, your cousin, whatever. He's 55 years old.
Yeah.
If he doesn't want to be found, he doesn't need to be. But there is enough circumstantial evidence to suggest that maybe he's gone and he didn't want to be. So we need to find out where he is. But it goes cold because the one thing they did have, the tips about the debit card being used,
right?
They couldn't get a clean photo of the person using the card. And based on size and everything else, it could have been him. Okay, that was the thing that was getting them. It's like, it very well could be Mark using his own card. They just didn't know and could not prove it. And, Joe, we've talked about this before. Sadly, a crime happens, and unless it gets solved or there's stuff moving in the case, moving it forward, there's another case right behind it that is just as important to whoever the victim is. So, and that's what happened here. It was 5 years. Okay, it started in 2016, March 2016. Here we are, October of 2021. And in October of 2021, this is how it's a tip from Mark Trent's niece led Delaware County investigators to Tennessee. And this is, remember how I told you about Ian Sheldon and his wife?
Yeah.
All right. They were living with Mark Trent, not when he went missing. They had been living with him the previous fall, but they had a falling out of sorts, and they were not living with Mark when Mark went missing. But Mark's niece would not stop. 5 years go by, Joe. And in that 5-year time period, she didn't let it go, and she found where the Sheldons were. See, they couldn't be found right away. Again, they had been living with Mark, but they weren't living with him at the time he went missing, supposedly. So Ian Sheldon is tracked down by Mark Trent's niece, and she tells investigators, you got to talk to him. You got to talk to this guy. And you know what, Joe? I think, respectfully, they did. But you are dealing with cross state lines now.
Yeah.
Because Muncie, Indiana is a different place than Delaware County, Tennessee. And yet, the niece was forceful enough to get this done, to get investigators to take a look at it. And again, even though police say, yeah, you're over 55, you can do what you want, they know when something's amiss, And in this case, I think they did recognize that something was not right. It appeared that carpeting had been replaced inside that home, Joe. That was the other part of this. But you know what? I just replaced some carpeting in my home because of what one of my dogs did to it. But, it's like you have the right to do that. It doesn't mean I cleaned up a bloody mess. I replaced carpeting. And so even though it's part of the puzzle. So 5 years go by. Investigators get this tip, and they go and talk to Ian Sheldon. What do we talk about on Crime Stories with Nancy Grace on a fairly regular basis? Criminals have a desire and a need to brag about what they've done. And most criminals think they can outsmart the law. And if you've done something and you think, well, hey, I'm going to talk to him so I don't look like I'm guilty, I'll talk to you. It's kind of like, yeah, you can search my house. No, you can't search my house without a warrant. No, you can't search my car without a warrant. No, I'm not answering your questions without an attorney present. Those are our rights. Ian Sheldon wanted to prove he didn't do anything wrong, so he talked to the cops.
What's the old adage? He had the desire to keep his mouth shut, but had the he wasn't capable of it.
Yeah, I had the right, but no, I wasn't capable. So,
and and that leads you down a road, and that's where listening. The best investigators, and I cannot count myself in this area, particularly when it comes to homicide investigators. I'm a death investigator. But to watch a true homicide investigator at work, it's not what they do at the scene. It's when you see them begin to question people. And I think that many folks out there conflate questioning people with just machine gunning questions at the subject. The biggest part of being an investigator is not trying to impress someone with your eloquence that you're speaking to. It's your ability to listen and really lean into what they're saying, without you ask the question.
Right.
And even if it's an uncomfortable silence, which I've been around a lot of those, you sit there and you listen to what their response is, and that's going to take you down the road. And that's what they're trained at doing. Cops are the same way though. It's all about, are they capable of applying that training, or do they want to step over them or step onto their process when they're trying to elicit information from somebody? And that's a difficult thing. And it is it is a premier skill. It's something that every department looks for, because there are certain people within departments where you would say, yeah, I want to get this guy in here, our colleague. This is the person I want to talk to this guy, because some people are just better at it than anybody else. And so it is quite the skill set to have. It's not just about going out and collecting evidence and standing there and looking really cool and saying, isn't that interesting? It's the ability to elicit information, because information is going to make or break the case, Dave.
And that's what happened. Based on Mark Trent's niece getting information for police, for them to follow up in Tennessee, Tracy and Ian Sheldon lived with Mark Trent in the fall of 2015. And it was Mark Trent's niece who tracked him down to Tennessee and gave that information to police. And hey, man, at this point, Joe, Mark Trent, over 5 years missing. Okay. So now you truly have not just a missing person, you have something possibly even more. And it gave police the reason, let's follow this up.
Yeah.
They sat down with Ian and his wife, Tracy. And believe it or not, police were there you mentioned how they go about these things. They're talking to the Sheldons saying, Mark left his dogs and his wallet. He never went anywhere without those dogs. He would never have left them. What do you think could have happened to Mark? See, they don't have to accuse the Sheldons of anything. They just have to listen, as you said, and ask, what do you think could have happened? Well, their first response should have been Mike Ehrmantraut from Breaking Better Call Saul, attorney, lawyer. Well, what do you think could have happened? Lawyer, but they didn't.
Yeah.
And the first story that Ian told, he told police that they had gone on a trip to Florida. And while they were on their way back from Florida, Joe Scott, they got into an argument in Tennessee. And something happened, and they split up, and that was it. Well, this story made sense to Ian Sheldon. Did not make sense to police.
Yeah.
So they grabbed out the trowel and started digging. They're picking at the scab that is the story being told by Ian Sheldon.
Great word picture, by the way. I like that.
Now, once they got him talking, Joe,
yeah,
that was it. Now, where you come into this, Joseph Scott Morgan, is what Paul Harvey used to call the rest of the story.
Yeah.
Because Ian Sheldon eventually admitted that, well, boy, I hate to say this, because I'm not going to say what he claimed, because I don't believe anything Ian Sheldon says as the reason behind what took place. But Ian Sheldon claims that he and Mark Trent got into an argument inside Mark Trent's house that Mark Trent owned, that Ian and his wife had been living at. And during the course of this argument, Ian Sheldon used a tent stake and hit Mark about the head. How big of a tent stake was he using to hit this man in the head, Joe?
Well, it'd have to be robust, in order to facilitate this, with a lot of power behind it. This is not something you're going to go, it would have to be able to withstand that kind of force, and there's a lot of tent stakes out there that are poorly made. Let's put it to you that way, Now, it doesn't have to be like a railroad spike, all right? But it does have to have some kind of physical integrity where it can match up with the force. One thing I want to go back to real quick, I think that Tracy, the wife, had actually alluded to at one point in time that this poor man had OD'd. And that came as kind of I think it probably came as a shock too, because they've got all of these stories, floating about.
I'm trying to remember where the OD came into this. If it was maybe that, you're right.
Well, when they were questioning her separately, they were able to pull her aside, and she's feeding them this story, and listen, you've said this many times on Body Bags, Dave. You've said that you can say anything you want to about the dead,
right?
Just like this fellow also alluded to the fact that this poor man whose dogs had been abandoned had made a sexual advance to him.
Yeah.
Now,
that's what he said was the point. The reason they got into an argument that led to a fight is that Mark Trent allegedly made a pass at Ian Sheldon.
Well, and that goes to prove, you can cast aspersions on anybody when they're cold and dead and decaying somewhere. But here's the mistake that was made in this particular case. It's not like they took his remains and scattered them to the wind, even though I think that may have been in consideration. They actually contained this poor man's remains in a very specific manner and dumped them where authorities, all these years later, could collect them and examine them. I've given thought over the years to, how can I say, disposal of human remains, and not from the perspective that I necessarily want to, not, dispose of human remains, but, you can't help, Dave, when you cover all these cases like this, you begin to think about, well, what could they have done where they didn't get caught, doing this, coming back to the methodology employed. And we've had everything, haven't we, on body bags? We've had acid, we've had more fires than we can count, right? We've had burials, we've had just surface depositions of remains.
Oh, yeah.
We've had people thrown in bodies of water. You go on it. I think we've even had a case. I think we even covered a case. Remember the case with the dynamite? I think that was out in Nevada where the guy, blew the guy up. I'm not saying we've had everything, all right, but we've certainly had a cornucopia thus far. We haven't had somebody fed to the sharks yet, so I'm waiting on that one. But it's probably coming. But yeah, in this particular case, this is kind of unique in the sense of how this poor man's remains were discarded, because this is being discarded, and where they were discarded.
It goes back to the confession. After police broke down he didn't overdose, he didn't make you guys didn't have a fight on the road. Once they got Ian Sheldon in the room to confess to this crime, this is what he confessed to. He said, Sheldon claimed that he and Trent argued after Trent allegedly made the unwanted sexual advance, but then Sheldon says he struck Trent multiple times in the head with a metal tent stake.
Yeah.
He admitted to cleaning the scene and replacing blood-stained carpet, purchasing a large plastic tote at Walmart, and placing Trent's body inside it. Now, Joe, one thing I want to be clear here. We're not sure if Ian Sheldon purchased the tote from Walmart before or after he was dead.
Yeah.
If he did it after he was dead, then that means that this poor man's body lay dead somewhere around his property while Ian and his wife go to the store to buy a plastic tote. Don't know that yet. Well, I don't know if we ever will know what exactly transpired.
The sequence, yeah.
Yeah, they did get a tote, and they placed his remains inside that tote in Muncie, Indiana, and drove to Tennessee. Now, Joe, based on what we know now, it appears that the body was placed in a bag of some sort before the body in the bag was placed in the tote. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that
Okay.
is.
All right.
Yeah, and it is, and it was meant, and it's curious that they use plastic. When I heard about the injuries, I knew that this was going to be markedly bloody. They had encased the victim's head in another bag,
Okay.
which makes sense. So you're going to cover the head, and this is about containment of the blood that would be all over the place. That brings us back, doesn't it, to the replacement of the carpet,
Right.
because there would be so much blood, at a scene with a head injury like this. The guy's not going to die immediately he might still have, like, where I always talk about agonal respirations and that sort of thing, still going to be at least oozing blood, from these defects. So he's going to have quite the mess on his hands. I think that they even mention that the perpetrator washed their own clothes. They cleaned themselves up, at this location. But it's the fact that they drove a long, long way to, I think it's, is it Fentress County?
I want to ask you something about what took place on the beating, because you mentioned the blood from the head.
Yeah.
Okay. But in the description, this is really important, because apparently Ian Sheldon described multiple blows to the head with that tent stake. He described Trent as moving his legs, making bubbling sounds, and remaining alive after the initial blows. So he hit him in the head with this and knocked him down, kept pounding him. He was not going to recover from that.
No.
And then they watched as he just and the description was so specific, making these bubbling sounds, that these observations are consistent with someone suffering a catastrophic head trauma.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. This kind of, they didn't necessarily, they didn't damage the area where the autonomic nervous system is contained in, to the point where he died immediately. And when I say that, I'm thinking of, when you think about the autonomic nervous system, you're talking about this, in very basic terms, our breathing, our heartbeat, all these sorts of things. It's still going to continue, but concurrently, as it is continuing, you have damage inside the cranial vault where you're losing the amount of blood that's incompatible with life.
Okay.
So the essence of life is trickling out of the body from these defects, Dave. And so the autonomic nervous system is still going to be going on. He's going to be having respiratory difficulty, which, is probably where you're getting this gurgling from, until finally life is going to cease. I hope that he was unconscious to the point where he had no awareness of this. This is a very brutal killing. Just the fact that, going back to what I'd earlier said about a weapon of convenience, out of all the weapons that you could have chosen in order to facilitate this, why do you land on tent stake? And maybe it's his own personal judgment. He's like, well, that looks rather ghastly, and this is going to be sufficient to the task at hand, as opposed to, did you not have a firearm available? Did you not even have a hatchet available? Because when you think about a tent stake, this is something that, well, let me put it to you this way. When you go out camping with a tent, yeah, you have a tent stake, but what do you also have with the tent stake to drive the tent stake? Generally, you have a mallet or a hammer, right?
Right.
So now you've got somebody that has to use their own force contained within their hand, their arm, to be able to drive this thing in his head. And also, how are you going to position him in order to facilitate this? Because the head, unlike the ground, is, when you strike initially, the head is going to move, all right? Unless you have him laying flat on the ground, you've wrestled him to the ground, you're pressing him to the ground, and you're driving this down almost like, some kind of Dracula movie or something. But even in a Dracula movie, they generally have a mallet, right? And they're driving the stake. And so this is fascinating just from the physical science standpoint. How do you generate enough force to facilitate this? And for all we know, he did have a hammer. But how are you going to restrain somebody to the point where you can facilitate this unless they're inebriated in some way? But, the problem is, Dave, we can't figure that out. We cannot, we're past that level at this point, because, when the remains are finally recovered, he's skeletonized, Dave.
Well, and on top of that, now, when Ian Sheldon, in his confession, and he says that they drove, that they placed this plastic tote containing the bag with the body of Mark Trent in the back of Mark Trent's own truck. Okay, they drove the truck 6 or 7 hours into Tennessee. It was not a short drive.
It's a poke, man. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're driving with this man's body in the tote, and when they got there, at some point in time during the disposal of Mark Trent's body, Ian Sheldon says they tried to burn it.
Yeah.
They tried to burn the body. Now, how many times have you talked about burning a body and what it takes to do that?
Yeah.
A lot. So it didn't
because
work.
not only would you be trying to burn the body, you'd be trying to burn the tote as well. And if it's a plastic tote, the beauty of plastic is that it's petroleum based, right?
Right.
So any kind of plastic that you have out there, all you got to do is listen to Billy Bob Thornton's summation about what all contains petroleum and Landman. And, plastic totes have got petroleum in them. So yeah, they will eventually ignite and burn. But it's a long, laborious process of burning something, and particularly human remains, because you have to have enough sustainable fuel in order to do that. Now, if you're trying not to draw attention to yourself, that's not a good idea to be standing over a body contained in a plastic tote and you've got fire and you're trying to burn this thing. Like with so many things, what I think catches up with perpetrators many times is a lack of patience. And in this case, I think that that's probably what happened, because as I'm understanding it, in this, just geographically, to understand where this place is located, this is not like in the Smoky Mountains. Smoky Mountains are kind of to the east. This is in like the Cumberland Plateau region. And I urge anybody, if you've never been to this area of the country, it's one of the most beautiful. It's isolated, but it's one of the most beautiful areas of the country. If you ever get to see it, it looks different than like the Appalachian area. So very beautiful, but they just went to the side of this mountain and pushed him over, pushed him over the edge of this thing, so he's tumbling down. I say the remains contained within the tote are all tumbling down. The upside to this, though, Brother Dave, is that we've got containment from an investigative standpoint, right? And we've talked about that. When you can consolidate a body that's buried where you have remains that are consolidated, they're much easier to retrieve, right? I'm just amazed that they were able to get to them and recover them.
I was shocked when we saw that, because you're talking almost 6 years.
Yeah.
You're talking years here, not months, years. But Ian Sheldon was able to take investigators to the place where they dumped the body, and the body remains were recovered in the bag. And this, as it has been reported, bag of bones tossed over the side and remained there for nearly 6 years. Because of the bag, I'm guessing wildlife did not strew the remains everywhere.
Well, you're talking about on the side of a cliff too. And I know that their animals will go anywhere. Okay. That's a given. However, it's not like the body has been deposited on the forest floor.
Yeah.
Where you've got little critters that are walking by. You're talking about on the side. And it sounds, at least what I'm reading, it sounds like I don't want to use the word hostile environment, but it's not like, you're going to have people, kind of tooling along. Gee, honey, isn't this a beautiful place for a hike? This is like an isolated area. But the beauty of it is that you have containment. You have containment of all these remains. And what intrigues me about this case, Dave, is that when the anthropologist got these remains, which this would have gone to an anthropologist, by the way, working along with the state medical examiner in Tennessee, first off, they did determine that the cause of death was what they're calling, this is interesting now, they're calling this blunt force trauma. Okay. Now we think about a tent stake. If we think about a tent stake, we're thinking sharp force injuries, right? So we've got 3, right? We've got incised wounds, we've got stab wounds, and we've got puncture wounds. I don't know what they were seeing with these insults to the head. I think he was struck 3 times. So did the stake not fully penetrate the skull? And I've had cases where you have this penetration that goes in, and Dave, you will actually see a plug of bone that's knocked up, where if you look down the shaft of the item that's doing the puncturing, you can actually marry up the shape.
Oh my
If it's you think about a tent stake, there's some that are, triangular like
Right.
that. You've got these kind of edges on it. And then there's
Mhm.
others that are tubular shaped with a point on the end. That'd be interesting to try to understand, what they saw on the table, the external table, the skull. And and I think that there was probably more than likely what we call a depressed skull fracture, which means that the skull itself collapses in like this. So if you have this pounding that goes in, the skull collapses in on itself. What happens when you do that? Well, the underlying tissue is grievously damaged. And this can go very, very deep, right? So you've got the epidural layer, you've got subdural layer, you've got the arachnoid, subarachnoid area of the brains that are all being impacted by this. So you're going to have like this profuse bleeding into an area. And of course, it's dictated by where the strike took place. Was it parietal, up here? Was it temporal down here? Was it in the occipital area? Maybe even the frontal area? No one really knows, but I do know this. They were able to deduce that this trauma was actually consistent with the story he had laid out, correct, Dave?
Yep. It was. They were able to verify everything. Once they got him talking, Joe, and this really does come down to once the confession was on the table, investigators just did a great job of getting this done. And they were able to get the story and then corroborate each part of the story, all the way from replacing the carpeting to finding the body in the bag on the cliff, going down the hill, and all the way back to every aspect of the crime that took place and take it. They got charges, it went to court, and got a conviction.
They did. And I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the Sheldon has in fact been sentenced to 69 years in prison, correct?
Yeah, and essentially, I mean, when you're now in your mid-40s, that's a
Yeah.
life sentence,
It is a life
which
sentence.
is what they expected. And it all came from, you know what, Joe? It was a niece who just didn't want her uncle to go without somebody looking. And she believed that the Sheldons had something to do with it. And it was the niece who, after 5 years, found the Sheldons and reopened the investigation. It broke quickly after that. Took years to get it back to court. Took years to get a conviction. But it was that niece that
Yeah.
wouldn't give up on it, Joe.
Well, it goes to show you, I think, in this particular case, that tenacity upon the part of the police is very important from an investigative standpoint. But you know what trumps that? The love of a family member that wants to honor their memory and wants to find out what actually happened. And in this case, a tip of the cap to the niece for never giving up on her uncle. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.